Module 4, Emergencies at Work. Welcome to this introductory module on emergencies at work. An important part of your role is knowing how to participate safely in the workplace, including knowing how to behave in an emergency. Responsibilities during emergencies. Legally, your employer has many responsibilities to follow, including ensuring that there are plans in place for dealing with emergencies, including fires. Any hazards that may affect the atmosphere must also be considered in these plans, and our fire protection and firefighting equipment must be provided. Building fire safety regulations require that people are able to evacuate safely in the event of a fire or other hazardous emergencies. Your employer must ensure that all employees and visitors know how to evacuate safely. Your responsibility is to know how to safely evacuate your workplace in the event of an emergency. You must make sure that you understand the safety systems in place at your workplace, including the different kinds of alarms you may hear, as well as the location of fire doors, emergency access stairs, and your nearest emergency exit. Make sure you find out what the emergency procedures are, including how to evacuate and where to meet on your first day. Emergency response. Your employer's emergency plan will usually include fire wardens. A fire warden is usually responsible for making the first response to a fire or threat of a fire. Usually there will be a fire warden for a particular area of the workplace. You must know who your fire warden is for your work area. Fire wardens will instruct you on how to respond to an emergency. They will also lead the fire and evacuation drills, and in the event of a real evacuation, they will ensure that all workers are accounted for. Evacuation procedures. When an alarm sounds, you must act immediately to ensure your safety. Alarm systems are designed to give early warning to allow you to safely exit the building during an emergency. Evacuation procedures will vary from each workplace. You must ensure that you are familiar with the procedures for your workplace. Tips for safely evacuating. Always respond to an alarm. Never assume the alarm is a test. Leave personal belongings. Evacuate using the closest emergency exit. Avoid using elevators during an emergency because they may break down or become stuck if power is cut. When you are safely outside the building, move to the evacuation assembly point and ensure that you have checked in with your manager or fire warden. Stay out of the way for emergency services, personnel, and fire wardens. Wait for instructions before returning to the building after an evacuation. Fire safety if you discover a fire. Remember to remain calm and go through the following steps. Activate the fire alarm, alert your nearest fire warden, call 000 and ask for fire services. Evacuate from the building, assemble with other staff, speak to your firefighters about what you saw. Fire extinguishers. You should have an understanding of the fire safety equipment that is at your workplace. Fire extinguishers are designed for different types of fires. If you're going to use a fire extinguisher, make sure you know which type of fire you are fighting. Check your work area for extinguishers and make sure you know where they are located and what types of fires they can be used on. First aid. The law requires employers to provide first aid, a safe working environment and adequate facilities for the welfare of their employees. This needs to include having appropriate first aid measures in place, including first aid kits and suitably trained first aid officers. Your employer must provide you with information and instructions on first aid in the workplace, including the location of first aid kits, names, contact details, and locations of first aid officers, and procedures on administering first aid or seeking further assistance. A sign with a white cross on a green background will show the location of first aid facilities. Contact information for first aid officers and emergency service telephone numbers and addresses should be located in or close proximity to each first aid facility or kit. Providing first aid in the workplace. Only trained first aid officers should provide first aid. If you are not a first aid officer and you begin to administer first aid to someone, you will take on the duty of care to that person. This means that you agree to exercise reasonable care and skill in providing first aid treatment. By starting first aid, you are declaring that you have knowledge and skills relevant to a medical emergency situation and that you will ensure your actions do not increase the risk of the person. If you commence first aid, you should continue to provide first aid unless the scene becomes unsafe, another trained first aider arrives and takes over, qualified help arrives and takes over, the casualty shows signs of recovery, you become physically unable to continue. Getting consent to provide first aid. Again, only trained first aid officers should provide first aid in the workplace. If you are not a first aid officer and you do provide first aid, before you start, you should ask for and make sure you get the injured person's consent to help. If the person is unconscious or cannot consent, you can assume that they would agree. It is very important that you take note that you should not give first aid if an adult who seems able to make a reasonable decision refuses your help or offer.